Make sure at least Prabhu can start Mangalachan prayers, and we can start, and we can meantime.
Yeah. Prabhu, we started. I just started the YouTube. So we'll have a small introduction to Prabhu. Harivalas Prabhu, you're there? You're able to hear us?
Yes, Prabhu. Can you hear me?
Thank you. Hare Krishna, Prabhu. And
Hare
I think
Krishna.
okay, thank you. Hare Krishna, Prabhu. Thank you so much for joining us. We'll give a short introduction. And this is our ISKCON Columbus Sunday feast. I see a few participants in our this thing. So our next program is like generally we have our discourse till 12:30 Eastern time. Prabhu, but you can take a few more minutes because we are starting. We are a little bit behind schedule. So 12:40 is also absolutely okay. Or even if you want to go a little bit more, that's absolutely okay. And so at around 12:40, we'll break for the local announcements. And a small introduction about His Grace Hari Vilas Prabhu. Hari Vilas Prabhu is a disciple of His Holiness Kadamba Kanand Maharaj. And he is currently the Vice President of ISKCON Brooklyn. Right, Prabhu? And,
yes,
Prabhu is originally from South Africa. And he's been in New York for a while, and thanks to Hari, we were able to get Prabhu today to share his thoughts, and it's a very, very interesting topic, Prabhu, which is relevant to all of us in failure or success, staying steady in spiritual life. So really looking forward to your discourse, Prabhu, and if possible, the last 10-15 minutes we can take a couple of questions, Prabhu. So
sure.
Please go ahead, Prabhu. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We'll just start with some prayers to the spiritual master. We'll invoke some auspiciousness so that we can say something hopefully valuable. Om Jnana Timirandasya Gyananjana Shalakaya Chakshuru Militam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha Shri Chaitanya Manobishtam Stapitam Yena Bhutale Swayam Rupa Gadamayam Dadati Swavadantikam Avanchakalpatarubhyascha Kripa Sindhubhyevacha Patitanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namaha Jai Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadara Shri Vasari Gaura Bhakta Vrinda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare. So thank you very much for inviting me to be here. I just want to confirm, ISKCON Columbus is you Hari Ramesh's father, Prabhu?
Yes, Hare Krishna.
Yes, so such a pleasure to meet you. It's my great.
Our deities here is Radha Natwar, Prabhu.
Radha Natwar, thank you very much. Yeah. It's my great fortune that I know Prabhu's son, Hari, who comes here regularly to New York City to come distribute books, and he is, for me, the personification of enthusiasm, devotional service. Such a wonderful boy, and so nice to actually know him. And I feel greatly blessed whenever he comes here. He brings such a nice energy. So I'm sure that ISKCON Columbus must be the origin of that energy. So nice to also be with you all here. So today we are speaking about, as our topic, the principle of being steady in success or failure. Which is such a central message that Krishna teaches in the Bhagavad Gita. In quite a few chapters, actually, Krishna speaks specifically about this reality of failure and success. And in fact, I would like to choose a verse from the second chapter of the Bhagavad Gita, in which Krishna explains that this is from the second chapter, verse 48. Of the Bhagavad Gita, and I will just chant the Sanskrit, and then I'll read the translation and the purport, and then we can take our discussion from there. Yogastha kuru karmani sangam tyaktva dhananjaya sitya samo bhutva samatvam yoga uchate. Perform your duty equipoised, O Arjuna, abandoning all attachment to success or failure. Such equanimity is called yoga. Purport. Krishna tells Arjuna that they should act in yoga. And what is that yoga? Yoga means to concentrate the mind upon the Supreme by controlling the ever-disturbing senses. And who is the Supreme? The Supreme is the Lord. And because he himself is telling Arjuna to fight, Arjuna has nothing to do with the results of the fight. A gain or victory are Krishna's concern. The following of Krishna's dictation is real yoga, and this is practiced in the process called Krishna consciousness. By Krishna consciousness only can one give up the sense of proprietorship. One has to become the servant of Krishna, or the servant of Krishna. That is the right way to discharge duty in Krishna consciousness, which alone can help one to act in yoga. Arjuna is a Kshatriya, and as such he is participating in the Varnashram Dharma institution. It is said in the Vishnu Purana that in the Varnashram Dharma, the whole aim is to satisfy Vishnu. No one should satisfy himself, as is a rule in the material world, but one should satisfy Krishna. So unless one satisfies Krishna, one cannot correctly observe the principles of Varnashram Dharma. Indirectly, Arjuna was advised to act as Krishna told him. So amazing here that Krishna gives a definition of yoga. It's a little different than what most people would think when they think about yoga. So here Krishna gives a very nice definition and explaining how yoga is ultimately a certain state and attitude that the spiritual practitioner has to adopt and cultivate. And that attitude is very simple. It is the attitude of simply fixing oneself upon one's duty and not being attached to success or failure in the external world. Failure and success, as Krishna defines it here, the specific Sanskrit word is siddhya siddhyo. So success or failure, being able to live up to one's goals, one could say. These things are ultimately out of our control, and that is a fact. What does it mean to fail? So there's different kinds of failure that we all experience in this world. The one thing is sure, we all know a lot about failure, isn't it? We go around here, if we have a lot of time, we can ask people about the various failures that we've encountered. That's what it means to live in this world. So failure often, and we start young in life. We can think, if you think back about the first time that you remember failing, you probably go back very early in your life. Some or other, you failed, you did something wrong, or you didn't manage to get what you wanted. So many varieties of ways that we fail in this world. But the failure also specifically, there's, depending on what level of consciousness we have, failure will also be differently defined. For the gross materialistic person, failure means failing to get what we want. So I chase a girl and she says no, and then I fail. Or I chase a lot of money and I don't make it and I lose it all. Or I invest all my money in Bitcoin and then it disappears. So failure for a materialist is defined in terms of gain. But for a more cultured person, for a religious person, what happens is we start to see our life in terms of duty. So we define our life, and we define our goals in life, not just depending on what it is that we want, or the fulfillment of our desires, but we see that actually our life is filled with all kinds of duties. And these duties, these duties are all based on the various kind of roles. As Prabhupada says here, he speaks about the Varnashram Dharma institution. And what is Varnashram Dharma? Varnashram Dharma just means that we take up a variety of responsible positions within this world. So all of us, we assume certain positions. We become a husband, we become a wife, you become a parent, or you become someone in a career. You take on a certain kind of career for which you are paid. You take on a certain occupation. You might even become a teacher. So many of us, we are inhabiting a large variety of roles in this world. When you become a devotee, then you also specifically take on that identity. Now you're a devotee of Krishna, a very specific role that you have to play. And all these roles, they all come with their own sets of responsibilities, all their own sets of duties that we have. For those of us who take initiation, if we take initiation, then immediately our life now becomes bound by a certain set of duties that is added on. And in this way, as we adopt more and more duties in this world, what happens is that more and more, the more duties you have, the bigger your chances of failure. The less duties, no failure. It's the one option one can take. Is that out of fear of failure, one simply does not take any responsibility. And Prabhupada, when he came to the Western world, he thought he would come. Prabhupada's initial strategy in coming to the Western world is interesting. Is he thought he would come, and then he would join maybe some, see if he could go to university, maybe teach bhakti. And he was having an idea, just like when he was in India, he was approaching various cultured gentlemen, and he asked them, please, you are a Brahmin, you are a cultured gentleman, please give me one of your sons. Allow me to train one of your sons up to Krishna consciousness. Sure, if Prabhupada would have gotten Hari, he would have been so happy. If he could have one Hari Ramesh, he would have been greatly ecstatic. But unfortunately, Prabhupada somehow it didn't happen in India. So then he came to the West, and it's not that Prabhupada planned to end up in the Lower East Side with all these hippies. It was just somehow, these were the people that were willing to listen, that were willing to work with him. So Prabhupada then came, and then he encountered this whole other kind of culture of people who were just abandoning duties. That the whole hippie culture is just about abandoning duties. No, marriage is just, ooh, why marriage? Why get married? No, just sleep with everyone and free love, and no, don't take up these responsibilities. A job, no, don't take up a job. Just play your flute and smoke marijuana, and just, be sort of, there's no duties, no responsibilities. So sometimes people also try that. And then we see Prabhupada had to convince these people. He had to somehow convince them, listen, you have to take up responsibility in life. What will happen to you if you don't take any responsibility? And we see that Prabhupada then, he didn't just have to explain to people to take up the responsibilities to be a devotee of Krishna. He had to explain to them, listen, if you want to live with a woman, you have to get married. And if you want to, if you want to do certain things, you have to take. So Prabhupada had to explain to people responsibility from the bottom up. And we see that then, but in a very short while, Prabhupada is able to elevate people to the point of being extremely responsible. And he convinced some of his leading men to take immense responsibility, and they could carry it. We see recently Giriraj Swami's book just came out. We will build you a temple. And it's all about detailing his attempts at fulfilling Prabhupada's instruction to build that big temple in Juhu. And you read it and you're just amazed. My God, such a young boy, actually, very young man. And it took up such an immense responsibility, and he executed it out so amazingly. So that is a big part of the kind of life that Krishna advises for us. Krishna's system is a responsible life. And when Prabhupada spoke about becoming a gentleman, that's what he meant. It means a gentleman is a person who is responsible. That is the first principle. And we see what is interesting is that in Krishna consciousness also, if one is able to be responsible, it becomes much easier. It helps one quite a lot when one starts to take the spiritual life, because one will then take that same sense of responsibility also into one's spiritual life. We saw that when some of Prabhupada's disciples stopped following their vows, and Prabhupada would speak to them, then Prabhupada didn't tell them, he didn't take a theological argument. He didn't tell them, oh, but you will not go back to Godhead, or Krishna will be so unhappy with you, or this. He looked at them and then he said, but you promised, how could you promised. Like, it's not about, it's like, but you promised, you gave your word. How can you not follow now anymore? But you made your promise. So Prabhupada was just coming from such a culture and such an understanding of when a man makes a promise, then it has to be kept. So we all of us, all devotees, everybody who takes initiation, specifically, but anybody who aspires and practices Krishna consciousness, generally it's impossible to do it without a sense of duty or responsibility. Then one is very flaky. So one takes that sense of responsibility, but then the moment that one takes that ability, one accepts, yes, I need to live a responsible life, then also we start opening up to failure. Then it becomes possible to fail, because then the stakes are getting higher. The more responsibility one takes, the bigger the risks and the bigger the challenges that will come. And it is then this principle that I really want to talk about, how to deal with the inevitable mistakes and the failures that will happen in our life. And it will come in various ways, in all our various duties, as a husband, as a wife, as a father, as a disciple, as whatever it is, we will encounter various degrees of sometimes successfully executing our duties and sometimes slipping, falling, making a mistake. And it comes in various ways. We can lose our temper at our children and unleash our anger on them. And then afterwards we realize that that's not what a parent is supposed to do. So in one sense, then we have failed as parents in a small instance. Or sometimes there can be heavy failure. Like at a certain point, your wife comes to you and she said, sorry, I want a divorce. Like, what does it means one has failed one tried to be a husband, and then at a certain point it just fails. One tries it and it doesn't work. So failure comes in various degrees in our spiritual life, and similarly in our life and in our spiritual life also, maybe at a certain point one can fail in executing the instructions of the spiritual master. And what to do with that in that kind of experience? How does one deal with that kind of failure? And it is very much accounted for in the Bhagavad Gita. Krishna speaks about it quite a lot, actually. He speaks about the reality of failure quite a bit. And it is this very subtle aspect of spiritual culture that has to be understood, because it actually will leave us feeling hopeful. And that is the point, that at the end of the Bhagavad Gita, we saw that Krishna, with Arjuna, he was willing to execute his duties, but with a great sense of hope. And he was again enthusiastic. You see, in the beginning of the Bhagavad Gita, he started to shake. His limbs were shaking. His mouth was dry. His skin was burning. And his bow was slipping from his hands. He was just completely overwhelmed by the reality of his responsibilities. But at the end of the Bhagavad Gita, he was enthusiastic. He was hopeful, and he was willing to execute his duty in a positive sense. So the message of the Bhagavad Gita is supposed to leave us feeling, one could say, enthusiastic and inspired in order to take up Krishna's call. That is, when one properly hears or properly understands, that is what it's supposed to be. There's a nice letter that Prabhupada wrote to one of his disciples, and he says, Krishna does not like to see his devotee depressed, which is nice. I mean, we knew it, but it was nice to see it in paper, that actually Krishna doesn't want us depressed. He also would actually like us to be happy. Krishna is not, he is pleased when his devotees are enthusiastic and positive. So how is it that Krishna deals with positivity? Firstly, Krishna does not sweep. If you will try to act, there's various ways in which one can deal with failure. And some of them are the root of hypocrisy is also in improperly dealing with failure. Sometimes when we fail, we try to hide it. Or first, what we might do is we even try to hide it from ourselves. We deny it. We are not even willing to, one could say, we are in denial about what is happening in our life. We see it sometimes with people. They're failing as parents. Like you see it sometimes people, men who work very hard, people have heavy careers. So they slowly neglect their children, and they know that actually it's going very bad. Their children are going in the wrong direction. They're not getting the love and attention that they need, but they just continue working, and they deny it. They don't really want to think about it. So in this way, we deny certain realities of our life. No, that is not healthy. That's not going to work. The other alternative that sometimes people take is that we can bluff. We fail and then we bluff. So sometimes people, there's husband and wife, sometimes they actually hate one another, and the whole marriage is a disaster. But they don't want to get divorced because it would cause so much embarrassment. So then, for the sake of pretending, they just somehow they keep it up. Or we see sometimes people can you attain a spiritual person, he can attain a big spiritual position. He's a teacher, and he's seen in his community as an upstanding devotee and whatever. But actually, he's finished. He's addicted to pornography and he's using drugs. But it's too bad. So he just bluffs. He just puts up a certain kind of appearance. We see it all over. You see so many instances of priests, not just all over, in all kind of various traditions, priests or religious leaders. And then a big scandal comes out that actually, he seduced so many women, he did this and that. But for years, they put up a certain kind of front. So that is all very, very, that is disastrous. Sriman Prabhupada Prabhupada points out in one Prabhupada, he says, better to be a sincere sweeper in the street than to be a charlatan spiritualist, to present oneself as what one is not. Better just be what you are. Yeah. So Krishna's idea of dealing with failure is that, firstly, there has to be a certain kind of frankness. It takes a certain kind of strength of character to accept when we have failed, when we have somehow have stumbled, not being able to execute the duties properly, not treated other people properly in our relationships. It happens. So there's small failures that, big failures are just the accumulation of small failures. For example, if you fail as a parent and your kids hate you and they, end up in a very bad condition, that doesn't happen overnight. That happens over years of small failures that accumulate, small incidents of doing the wrong thing, not treating them properly, not dealing with them properly, and then it grows. So all kinds of relationships, same thing. At a certain point, if you completely abandon your spiritual vows and you break all the regulative principles and you stop the spiritual practices, that doesn't happen in one day. It's not just, it accumulates slowly, just like how your beard grows. It's like that one night you just have a big beard. It's like every day, imperceptibly. You can't even see it from one day to the next. But after a week, you're like, geez, what happened here? How did this happen? I didn't even see it coming. So in this way, Prabhupada says how the material energy, she slowly wears us down. So similarly, failures is the accumulation. Big failures is the accumulation of these small failures that we do. And what is nice about that is it means that we can also catch it. The earlier we catch it, the better. The earlier we catch it, the earlier we can start adjusting ourselves. So firstly, therefore, it requires a certain sense of being frank, being honest. Make a mistake, you have to be willing to see, yes, I actually just made a mistake. I shouldn't have done that. I shouldn't have said that. And the more refined we become in our awareness of our mistakes, the easier we can correct them. The quicker we can catch them, the smaller the mistakes we can catch. So that is one of the main benefits of humility, is that one is able to honestly understand himself. We don't present ourselves as something we are not. And even in our own minds, we don't try to hide from our own mistakes. And that is why Prabhupada quoted this famous slogan. He used to use it quite a lot, where he was saying that failure is the pillar of success. This is something we find quite often in Prabhupada's letters. Even in his purpose, I think he would write about that. How failure is the pillar of success. Failure is not actually the problem at all. Failure is not at all a disqualification of an issue. It is simply how you deal with that failure that will then either lead to destruction or lead to elevation. As they say, good choices are the results. What do they say? Does that kind of thing work? Good choices come from experience, and experience comes from bad choices. So by doing the wrong things, you get certain experience, and then that makes it possible to do the right things much more easier. So in that sense, Prabhupada to say, yes, failure, not a problem. Failure is the pillar of success. We see when some of his disciples would try to arrange programs for him, would do certain kind of things. Sometimes it would fail very magnificently. Like they rent a big hall for a few $1,000s. They spend thousands of dollars on publishing, and then only 2 people show up. And Prabhupada is there speaking in a hall. There's only 3 people. And his disciples were so embarrassed. And afterwards, Prabhupada said, no. He says, did you not see? Narada Muni was there. Lord Brahma was there. It's like we were speaking about Krishna. There can be no failure. So therefore, Prabhupada was not concerned by external failure if people make mistakes. We even see that when some of Prabhupada's disciples would sometimes make serious mistakes. Prabhupada was very willing to actually come with people and give them a second chance. Not just a second chance, a third chance, a fourth chance, no problem. So long as that sincere desire is there to continue to serve Krishna and to continue trying to improve oneself, and Prabhupada is always willing to accommodate it. You see the classic example, one of his disciples, Madhvisha Swami, was a sannyasi, but then who left his vows and ended up getting married, and it was very public and very embarrassing. But at a certain point, a long time afterwards, he met Prabhupada again. And then Prabhupada was so kind to him, so gracious. Prabhupada was so happy to see him, genuinely happy, because he loved Madhvisha quite a lot. Madhvisha had done great services for him. And then Prabhupada was speaking to him, asking, what is he doing? how's his life going? I asked him about his wife, and he was just treating him so nicely. And then he was again giving him the opportunity to do some service. And then Madhvisa, he asked Prabhupada, he said, Prabhupada, how can you, I abandoned my vows. I made such a big mistake. How can you just be so, accept me back so easily? He said, Lord Chaitanya, we see that Lord Chaitanya, when Chota Haridas just glanced lustfully at a woman, he was banished from Lord Chaitanya's association. He says, but you accept me back so easily. So Prabhupada said, he says, no, I am just an insignificant person. Any person who is willing to help me in my mission to my spiritual master, I am just eternally grateful. So very interesting how Prabhupada was able to always be willing to work with people, whatever their frailties are. But the one thing Prabhupada did not tolerate was hypocrisy. And that is the one thing that wherever that was perceived, Prabhupada would come like a thunderbolt. There's this one story of a man who was living, I think it was in Vrindavan, the Vrindavan temple. And once there was this man, he was a cook, he was working in the kitchen. So once Prabhupada was sitting with disciples and he saw this man walking to his room with a bag, some bag. And somehow Prabhupada got suspicious and he says, go look what is in that bag. So then they went to his bag and they saw it was 2 bags of sugar. And then Prabhupada said, go into his room, go see what is in his room. And when they went into his room, I saw his whole room was just stacked with supplies from the kitchen. Flour and sugar and dal, all kinds of stuff. This man was stealing these little bits out of the kitchen. And then he would sell it again. He would sell it to other people for a cheap price. So Prabhupada just immediately, he didn't even ask this or that. He says, kick the guy out immediately. They just immediately kicked him out. It wasn't like even just asking where to go. It's not that Prabhupada was like that was not an instance of, that is an instance of calculated theft. And there's no remorses. And so the guy was just there. He was a rascal. So Prabhupada kicked him. So it's not that Prabhupada was unintelligent or that he was somehow sentimental. But it is wherever there was sincerity, he was willing to work with that. So when Krishna says here, one should abandon all attachment to success or failure, that is yoga. We have to understand that this kind of yoga, this kind of dealing with failure is only available for the spiritual person, those who are sincerely spiritual, because in sincere spiritual life, the goal is to please Krishna. That is the actual goal. And all the other things that we take, these are all external things. These are secondary things. These are temporary things. Still, we can do it in a way to please Krishna. For example, if you're a husband or a wife, that's important. And Krishna gives certain instructions for how one should be a husband or a wife. But that identity is not permanent. That like when this body ends, that relationship ends. So therefore, these kind of the external ways or the identities that we adopt, these things are not permanent. And therefore, the real success does not depend on, the real success depends on, is Krishna pleased in the way in which I perform these duties? That is the actual real success. So therefore, for the spiritualist, it is able to come to a platform of understanding what is real success and what is real failure, and that the externals of our life should not disturb us. But that is possible when one becomes fixed in pleasing Krishna. And then we see that the attitude that Krishna wants us to adopt is an attitude of not being disturbed by the externals, but they're always focusing on the essence. And the essence is on acting in a way that is pleasing to Krishna and favorable to him. And that it is due to too much attachment to our external appearance, how we appear to other people in the world, too much attachment to the externals that actually makes us so disturbed by external success or failure. And that disturbance is actually very unfavorable for our spiritual life. So this ability to be frank in understanding where we are, what is right and what is wrong, what we do, what we should do and what we shouldn't do, that is the first requirement. And then the second requirement, as Krishna says here, is to continue being able to perform our duty and try our best, regardless of how much success we achieve. And we see it exemplified by many devotees in our movement. We see sometimes devotees who, sometimes people who do a lot of book distributions, try to go out and sell Krishna's literature on the street. Sometimes they might not be so good They might not sell like thousands of books. I know one devotee, he goes out every single day. Every single day he goes out, sells 1 or 2 or 3 books. And he only sells maybe 2 books, 3 books. He never sells a lot. 1 or 2 books, 3 books a day. And you think, my God, this guy's going out every day for like 5-4 hours and he just sells 1 or 2 books. Like, geez, I would become a little bit depressed after a while and maybe consider a change of career. But this devotee is interesting. He says, but he told me, he said, no, but actually, I maybe only sell 1 or 2 books, but I go out every single day of the year. So in a year, I sell like oftentimes more than 1,000 books. And then you're like, wow, that's actually like 1,000 books. That sounds like that's quite impressive. So the thing with Krishna consciousness is that it is the consistent investment in Krishna service that counts the most. That will have the most balance. That is actually the thing that is the most important. That will have the most effect. It is that consistent attempt. For example, chanting our rounds. Who chants wonderful rounds of japa? Not many of us. No? But it is, if we do it every single day, that adds up immensely. If you chant every single day for your whole life, at the end, that puts so much weight in the scale in terms of being able to praise Krishna, that consistent effort. And similarly with so many of these things, like, difficult situations, like with parents, I was recently some people were speaking about how difficult it is to raise teenagers. And Krishna consciousness is very difficult. Like when they're young, the temple is much more easier also to get them excited about Krishna consciousness because the drums and the music and this. It's like you take kids to them. Kids can have a good time anywhere. You just let them loose. You just give them enough place to play, and then they like the temple. They don't mind going to the temple. But once they hit puberty, specifically, nowadays when we're much more integrated with modern society, because it's very difficult. Because the temple, it's not so cool. It's not so cool. There's this and that, and then they become much more difficult to keep them inspired about Krishna consciousness, keep them not just about Krishna consciousness, but keep them out of trouble. What to speak about, like just keep them away from so many bad habits that can possibly happen. So even then, but this person was telling me, he said, what I realize is that I have to just think long term. I have to understand that maybe now they'll be a teenager for the next 4 or 5 years, but I have to do what I can to make sure that I can stay. I can invest in this relationship. They can stay. I have a good relationship with them for the next 20, 30 years. So even as teenagers, it's very difficult, but when I have to just consistently keep putting in that positive energy, investing and being concerned about them, spending time with them, and even if it seems like they are not exactly doing what we want them to do, one has to stay their friend, have a good relationship with them. So it is the same thing with Krishna. It might not be every day that we feel greatly inspired, but it is that consistent effort that pays off. And therefore, we should not be too disturbed by individual events of failure, like individual mistakes. We should just take it, as Prabhupada says, as the pillar of success. Learn from them. Learn from our mistakes. Don't deny them. Don't hide them, but also don't be discouraged by them. And see what we can learn from them. And next time we do it better. And that attitude is what Krishna calls yoga. He defines that as yoga because that is the attitude that will allow one to fix one's mind. I oftentimes see if you, in the service of cultivating people in Krishna consciousness, so people who come and they become interested in Krishna consciousness, then you see them go through so many various phases, beginning great enthusiasm. You come specifically for people who come from outside of the Indian culture. So, not so completely new, so don't know any of these things, and they come in and it's this great excitement, and then you start getting into it, and you start practicing and you hear about Krishna and get very excited. But then what will happen with many people I see is at a certain point they encounter their first failure in spiritual life, which comes in various ways. They might be lose enthusiasm, or they have a bad experience, or they realize they actually crave certain things that they now have learned are sinful, and then they realize that I will never be able to do this again. So they encounter their first failure in spiritual life, and then what happens is most of the times, people they rather than be a failure in spiritual life, they rather give up spiritual life. So they don't want to be. They want to Don't want to be a failed spiritualist. So then rather just not be a spiritualist at all. Just be a successful materialist. So this attachment, this fear of failure can actually keep one from properly being steady in Krishna consciousness. And we see in the pastimes of the Lord many examples of people that for all estimates looked completely insignificant and not very successful, but actually harbored within their hearts great love of God. We see in the pastimes of Lord Chaitanya the story of, what was his name, the banana seller?
Kolavecha Sridhar.
Kolavecha Sridhar, yes. You see Kolavecha Sridhar, which for all external points of purposes was not a very successful individual, like very poor. He was not even known by the other associates of Lord Chaitanya so much. It's not like he was like part of the crowd. He was just a very insignificant person, but actually in his heart harboring great love for Krishna and a great taste for the holy name. So therefore the success in spiritual life, you never know really who's successful or not. And it is this kind of different, this is what it means to enter onto that spiritual platform, that we look at the world completely differently. And Krishna's teachings are supposed to help us understand this mystery and relieve us from two things. The first price that we have to pay is that we have to give up pride. So we see in Krishna we give up pride. But if you are willing to give up pride, then also you are allowed to abandon guilt. You can actually overcome guilt, because we see that Krishna's understanding is that whatever you do, if you keep fixed in your service to me, I will deliver you from all sinful reaction. I will help you overcome the reactions to all your previous mistakes, provided that you're willing to be humble and continue to serve me and continue to be dedicated to my service. So it is that how we abandon those dualities of the material world and come onto this transcendental platform and become fixed in our desire to render service to Krishna. And in that way, over time, we shed. And we see that at the end of the Bhagavad Gita, Krishna explains how he defines, how does it look when a person becomes a transcendentalist? Brahmabhuta prasanatma nasochati nakankshati. That they abandon lamentation, hankering and lamentation just subsides. The mind just stops getting into this constant tussle between desiring for something and lamenting, feeling guilty or feeling proud, like all these dualities that are playing off. The mind just abandons all that. And I realized, listen, my only success in life is if I can attain Krishna's mercy by pleasing him. And nothing can actually obstruct that, not even my external failure. All that is required of me is to keep my steady determination in abiding by Krishna's instructions and executing my service to him. And then I'll be successful. And then we look, for example, at the life of someone like Pankaj Guru and even his brother. We see that that is simply all that he did. In one sense, very simple what he did. He just completely stayed fixed in executing his service for such a long period of time. And then we see, but the end result of that is something so immensely glorious. And now we see the whole world glorifying this person simply because of this one thing. And both of those brothers are the embodiment of just being very humble and not actually getting disturbed by anything that happens. Even Mayapur went through so many different changes, but over the years they were just completely fixed in executing their duties. So we saw that it seems like something so simple, but that attitude is actually immensely powerful, and is something we can also imbibe in our day-to-day life, as we are also trying to make our small attempt at trying to please Krishna, which might not look very dramatic, but at the end, if it is executed consistently and sincerely, it can have the most wonderful results, which is Krishna's complete mercy. Because that's the amazing nature of Krishna's mercy, is that he is free to bestow it wherever he wants. And he does not put a size on it. He does not say that you have to do this big service and then you will get my mercy. You see in the history that so many people have received Krishna's mercy. And he decides who gets it and where. Okay, so these are a few thoughts on failure, success, and spiritual life, and trying to show the difference between the materialistic mentality and the spiritualist mentality, and seeing how the Bhagavad Gita is really urging us to abandon that tussle between pride and guilt, and trying to be not disturbed by failure, but just understand what is the most important thing. And if successfully adopted, this mentality will leave us enthusiastic and hopeful about Krishna's mercy, and very positive about executing our duties in our spiritual life. So we can have the opportunity, if there's any comments or any questions, welcome to hear also your own thoughts on the matter, and see what the devotees have to say.
Yeah. Thank you, Prabhu. Thank you very much. Amazing thoughts and about how we deal with failures and okay, amazing. So if there are, I see you raised hand. Rukmani Mataji, please go ahead.
Hare Krishna, thank you so much for this deep and inspiring discourse. So one thing you mentioned was that we do have to learn from our failures. So in order to learn from our failures, we have to go back and see what we did wrong. So, and especially if it's a big failure, and like you say, if it's something that, accumulated over many years, then there could be many things that we did wrong. So how do we keep from wallowing in failure and living in the past, yet at the same time, we do need to learn and understand what we did wrong?
Yes, very nice. Yeah, let me see that. The question is, what is our response? As I said, like, you would see sometimes Prabhupada, like, there's that one story when he was in Vrindavan, and there was this one devotee every morning when Prabhupada would go on his morning walk, and then when he came back, then this person would be singing prayers, singing or glorifying Prabhupada, standing as a little bit of an eccentric individual. It was like saying all these glorifications of Prabhupada. And then one day, as Prabhupada was walking back, he was chastising his managers about the fact that the temple wasn't very clean. And then this person was there doing their thing. Prabhupada said, "Hey, why don't you do something useful and clean that? Why don't you do something useful and sweep this walkway?" So the same thing is there sometimes when we start analyzing our failure. The question is, how useful is it to wallow in your failure? The thing is, do something useful. Do something about it. Any kind of thing, any time that we fail, we can do something. We can actually do something about it. We can make our attempts to repair it. And therefore we see that's why Prabhupada reciprocated so wonderfully with people, that even after immense failure, they came back and again were willing to render service. So that's like a proactive way in which we approach our failures at the moment we become aware of it. So same with our relationships. If we do something wrong, if we say something bad, or we lash out at people, or we treat them improperly, then you can just go lie in your bed and think about it and feel so bad about it. But the other alternative is you can do something about it. You can invest the positive, do something for them, try to serve them then in a certain way. And we see that is really, it is that positivity, that positive proactive approach is the key. So we have to, even if you just take it from a utility, like there is no point, no good result comes from simple lamentation. And lamentation is oftentimes, even by Krishna again, he chastises Arjuna so heavily, saying, what is this lamentation? Anarya Jushtam. Such a uncivilized approach to life, just lamenting like that. He says, rise up and do something. So it is by taking stock of our failures, it's supposed to inspire us to improve and to do something and to right our wrongs. And you see that even when it comes to that greatest mistake we can make, offending the Vaishnavas, and what are we supposed to do? We're supposed to beg for forgiveness and serve that same Vaishnava that we offended. And that actually shows our sincerity. Because sometimes what we do is we fail, or we're lamenting our failure, but we don't really care about the fact that because another person's suffering, we are just suffering because we don't want to look like a failure. But you show your sincere repentance by actually trying to do something for those people that have been affected by your own errors. And in that way, actually, failure can be harnessed, one can say, as a positive motivation behind their actions. And that is what Prabhupada would generally also qualify as real sincerity, is that willingness to actually render service and not just speak words or be sentimental.
Very nice. Thank you.
Thank you.
Any other Prabhu side, any question or comments, please?
No, thank you very much, Prabhu. It's a very nice, inspiring class. You gave some very nice practical examples how to deal with within family, outside family, individually. So it's very helpful. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Prabhu.
I see Navin Krishna Prabhu. Prabhu, please go ahead.
Yeah. Thank you, Prabhu. It's a nice thought-provoking class. So there's a couple of it's a combination of question and a comment. Yeah. So one point you hit is the fear of failure can also leads to guilty and then eventually giving up the service. So and that's one thing, and also because of that, and people will not also come forward. What if I fail? And I'm comfortable, I'll do it. So one is doing it and unsuccessful and giving up. And the other is because of fear of failure, not even trying to do it. No, I will not be successful. I will not even attempt. When I feel confident, I'll do it. So there's two extreme ends. But at the same time, you also mentioned there's a fear of failure also can lead to success. Because a lot of times we hear every failure for stepping stones to success. So now there's two things. How do you reconcile?
Yes, so I understand correctly, the two things to be reconciled, to find a balance, you mean, between those extremes of...
Yeah.
So yes, we see definitely fear of failure. Krishna also urges Arjuna to shake off his lethargy, shake off your resistance, your fear, and just stand up and fight. He also inspired Arjuna to become courageous. So therefore, in spiritual life, we actually need quite some courage, to tell you the truth. To take up spiritual responsibility, we need some courage to be able to do it. So we have to ourselves find ways in which to become courageous, and the basis of our courage is in having faith that Krishna will protect us. We see that in the earlier days of this movement especially, people were willing to take great risks. And the reason why they were willing to take that great risk, why they had so much courage, is because they were inspired by Prabhupada's presence. And they had faith that, yes, just look, Krishna protected Prabhupada. They took a great risk and Krishna protected him. And there's this one letter where Prabhupada writes to the disciple, I think it's a letter of conversation, where he says that if you take some risk for Krishna, it says, then you will force Krishna's hand. It says, if you want to see the hand of God, you have to take some risk for Krishna, because then you will see the hand of God coming in your life and assisting you. So even taking initiation in one sense, I remember at my initiation ceremony, I was a little nervous. I was like, oof, this is serious. I'm going to sit now and make this promise and this thing. And my heart was beating a little. So we need some courage, actually. And we have to see that if we are without courage, it's actually going to be very difficult to move forward in spiritual life. Now, it's not that we all have to do something as drastic as Prabhupada, but sometimes that courage can be sometimes even something very simple. When they send out that letter in the temple, they say, listen, we need this service. We need someone to take up the service. Just put up your hand and say, okay, I'll do it. That takes some courage, even that. So we see that courage is required in spiritual life, and we cannot get around it. And we should also then see in dealing and helping other devotees that sometimes other people need some help and encouragement. So we see even that word, encouragement, is exactly that. You try to give other people courage. You try to give them some courage and help them understand Krishna will help them. And then we can also, that's really how we grow as a community and we grow as people. And we have to ourselves, unity is strength. By the association of devotees, one gets some courage to do these things. And then you said also there's that positive element of failure, and that's also true. This is one purport where Prabhupada writes. He says that every civilized man is afraid of falling from his position. So a certain sense of fear also keeps us, a certain sense of fear from what will be the result of abandoning my duties is also healthy. To understand that, okay, I can abandon my duties, but then what will happen? And so Prabhupada says that is just one complaint, his only complaint with his Western disciples. Well, two things actually. The one is that they always change things. And the other one is that he says they are not sufficiently afraid of the material energy. They're not afraid of what will happen if I abandon my vows. So it's true, a certain sense of fear of stepping outside of Krishna's shelter actually also helps us to take shelter of Krishna. So fear is therefore not always bad. It's not always bad. But again, we use everything in the service of Krishna. So even fear, when the fear stops us from taking responsibility in Krishna's service, that is not bad. That's bad. That fear has to be abandoned. But then when fear helps us to keep our commitments and to keep our promise to Krishna, that fear is actually good, and that fear doesn't have to be abandoned. So in this way, the devotee, he is renunciation, yukta vairagya. He sees that everything has its utility in Krishna's service, and he renounces things or embraces things based on whether it is favorable. So in this way, we strike that middle ground between these two different manifestations of fear.
Thank you, Prabhu.
Thank you, Prabhu, for a wonderful question.
Thank you, Prabhu.
Yes.
Anybody else have any other questions or comments? Hari is very quiet today. I don't know, Hari doesn't want to talk.
He's tired.
Yeah, I think. Hari, you're there?
Yeah. Hare Krishna, Hare Prabhu. Thank you so much for serving the class today. It really means a lot. I learned a lot about success and failure. It's really quite nice. So thank you very much, Prabhu.
That's Hari. We'll have to have a special class on how to deal with success for you, Hari, because you're such a success in your spiritual life. Krishna says, interesting, he says that one should tolerate both happiness and distress. So that can be another interesting, we can have a whole session on how to deal properly with success, which can be even more dangerous than failure, interestingly enough.
It's interesting that if you look at the example in the Shastras, that I was thinking that it's very natural that people get intoxicated over success because that's the foundation of gambling. But you don't see a lot of people, we can't think of many examples of success of people getting intoxicated over failure. But if you look at Sudama Brahman, he was always poor, and it said that he was attached to being poor. And I was thinking, what's an example in my daily life of somebody I think that's intoxicated in failure, and I see a bunch of these like homeless people and people who are destitute of society, mentally ill people, and that they're just used to not getting it over and over again. I was thinking that you can go in extremes on both sides, but to as Krishna says, being steadfast either in happiness or distress, that's the sign of a devotee.
Yes, thank you, Hari. It's a nice point.
So thank you, Prabhu. And so if you don't mind, I have one last question, Prabhu.
Sure.
So it's a very nice discourse, Prabhu. I just wanted to get like a takeaway point kind of thing. Is like when we talk about spiritual life, the first thing for us comes to be the chanting of the holy name.
Yes, sir.
And what happens is, though we do multiple times, we are trying to improve our chanting, that I will not say a failure, but we see that glimpses of failure repeatedly. We are not able to, I'm not saying we, at least I'm talking about myself. I'm not able to improve my chanting in the sense like I'm not able to. So would you have any good thoughts apart from the desire to chant better? Is there anything else which you think I can have in my life which will help? So thank you, Prabhu.
Sure. Oof, interesting question. Well, we see that the real success, it's an interesting point my spiritual master made once. It says that you have to understand that the real success of your chanting will come at the end of your life when you're just about to die. And it is at that point that actually you will chant. And it says at that point, it is very easy to chant very sincerely. My spiritual master has had quite a few near-death experiences. He is a very exciting, he says his karma is very exciting. He has like many times actually almost died, a few times by car accidents and whatever. And he says that he has that experience that when that time comes, he says when you see, he says sometimes you drive. He says in a car accident, for example. He says that what happens is that he says it now because he's been in a few. So he says at a certain point, you see something happen, and then you think, oh no, it's not so serious. Oh, like this, say the car just starts to shake. You think it's not so serious or something. But then at a certain point, you realize, oh, whoa, now it's serious. Then you realize, oh, and then you realize, okay, now I might die. There's that moment. Sometimes we're on a plane also. You're on a plane, and then it's like it shakes a little bit, and then at a certain point, sometimes I don't know if you've ever been on a plane that has heavy turbulence, and then you see people are like, whoa, like now maybe we're gonna die, and then the whole atmosphere in the plane changes. So my Guru Maharaj says that he says actually at the end of life, he says really that at that point you chant. It's very easy to chant Krishna's name very sincerely, very intensely. And we have to understand that we are practicing actually for that time. The goal of life, ante narayana smriti, the goal of our life comes at death. Prabhupada also quoted that Bengali proverb. He says, at the time of death, all your practice is tested. That's actually the match, and everything else is just, we're just practicing. So the real thing when it comes to our chanting, what we're trying to accumulate some of Krishna's mercy. That's really what it is. The success of our chanting is accumulating Krishna's mercy. Sometimes Krishna allows us to be absorbed or not, but we are just simply trying to attract that mercy. And therefore, there is never a time that we chant the holy name that is unsuccessful. If we chant the holy, that in itself is success, because that will attract Krishna's mercy. But then from our side, we try, and we know that there are certain things that help us. Like, for example, chanting early in the morning and being strict about what kind of things we watch and what kind of things we expose our consciousness to. That is our side of the bargain. So when we try to improve our chanting, I at least for myself, I try to focus on those things that are in my control, which I know, which means go to bed early, and avoid watching too many stupid things on YouTube. And because these are the things that are within my control. But the moment that I sit down and I start to chant, then at least for myself, I realize that it's out of I cannot control my mind. It's completely out of my control. And now all that I'm simply trying to do, I'm not trying to achieve anything. I'm not trying to force any kind of experience. All I'm trying to do is I'm trying to attract some of Krishna's mercy. And that gives me a sense of hope. Even sometimes it's very difficult because I know that Krishna is very merciful. And that simply by chanting his holy name, if one makes any kind of endeavor at any time, at any condition, that Krishna's mercy will be there. And if I feel that I'm really struggling to concentrate, I hope that at the end of my life, then we see that, as my Guru Maharaj says, that time it will be very easy to chant with full concentration if one has that opportunity. So in this way, chanting should not necessarily bring us stress when we chant. It should actually be, as Prabhupada said, a great form of solace. Chanting is supposed to bring us a sense of solace because we are at that moment surely attaining Krishna's mercy. And if we sometimes get too much caught up in a certain idea of how it should be, it can actually turn chanting into a stressful experience. But we see that Lord Chaitanya's mood was especially simply that continuous chanting. It's just about just keeping the vibration going continuously as much as possible. That in one sense is the most important thing, and not necessarily about forcing a certain kind of experience. So that element of continuous absorption in the holy name is what will prepare us best for that end of life. And it is that end of life, it is at that point that our chanting will really be tested. Is that okay, Prabhu?
Amazing, Prabhu, amazing, Prabhu. Thanks for your...
You should tell me about how to chant Hare Krishna. I always feel so embarrassed when I give class with people that are great, senior to me. And somehow this is because the devotees are like that. So in any case, I don't know much about chanting Hare Krishna. And I can see from your children, from you also, I know that you are very serious about chanting Hare Krishna. So some thoughts at least.
Thank you so much. It was really hope-giving. It is always very happy to hear Maharaj's words. So thank you so much. And unless if you have any other comments, I think we can wrap this with some local announcements. And once again, thank you, Prabhu, for your time. I know you have a very, very busy schedule in New York, and you could take some time and help us. So that's great.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, devotees.
Hare Krishna. So we have a couple of local announcements, and then we can take a pause for this week. So the next week, so it's please mark your calendars. It's very important. Like on 22nd, we start with that's next Saturday is Ekadasi, Mohini Ekadasi. So if anybody wants to have do Kirtan, please contact me. And the next Sunday, the 23rd, that's when our big week, that is the week of the Narsimha Chaturdasi festival is there. So we start exactly on Sunday. So Sunday at 4:30 in the evening. So the next Sunday feast, the timings will change just for that Sunday. It's not for every Sunday, just for that Sunday, the 23rd. And in order to get the association of His Holiness Rompad Swami Maharaj. So, and we will be having a joint Zoom call with ISKCON Detroit. So Maharaj will be speaking on that day, and more details will be sent by email. So please watch out your emails and please join. And it's at evening 4:30. So I think we'll go from 4:30 to say 6 or 6:30. So this will be the timings, and we'll be with ISKCON Detroit. So we all get the association of Maharaj in that holy week. And then on 25th is the big event where we have the Narsimha Chaturdasi. All details will be coming out in an email, but please definitely mark your calendars. It's in the evening, 7 o'clock. We will have the discourse by His Holiness Giriraj Swami Maharaj. So that's also one big event. Please mark your calendars and do definitely join. So those were the two announcements I had, and I thank everybody for joining us in today at 11 o'clock for the glorification of His Grace Pankaj Guru Prabhu. And I see Rukmini Mataji's hand raised. So could you, Mataji, if you can go ahead, please.
Yes, Hare Krishna. So I just wanted to remind people that I had sent the email that I'm wanting to do Vaishnav Seva on Tuesday, Janu Saptami Day. So if you haven't already RSVP'd, some of you have RSVP'd, please RSVP by tonight to get your Prashadam box on Tuesday. And you can pick it up starting at 1, but you can also pick it up in the evening. So you email me with Prashadam the number of boxes. And hopefully everyone on this call who is in Columbus should get boxes.
Thank you, Mother. If you need any help, please let me know also. And I think I sent my email, so probably you got that. So, and anything else, Prabhu? Anybody else wants to share something? I have a few people here. Like the only other, I think, I don't know if Ramtit Prabhu or you want to make something on the new temple fundraising. Do you want to say something, Prabhu?
I don't have any information, Prabhu, on that.
Okay. So I know that the campaign started on Akshaya Tritiya day. So for 10 days, so all the communication has gone through email and in WhatsApp also. All this. So please, hopefully everybody got that email. And so the next, I think it's open for another 10 days. So for starting from the Akshaya Tritiya day. So if anybody wants to contribute for the new temple and as well as some prayers of Lord Narasimha at their home, if they want to have that, then they can just follow the link on that fundraising site. So I think that's all I had from my side. Prabhu, any other comments or any other last minute things before we close the session for today? Nothing, Prabhu. So we'll close with our Vaishnava prayers. Vancha kalpatarpadasa kripa sindhubhyevacha patitanam bhavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo namo. Ananta Koti Vaishnava Vrinda ki jai. His Holiness Pankaj Guru Prabhu ki jai.